Hello, Steve Townsend here with Townsend Handcrafted Whips, and I am here today with Blake Vernon. Going to just make a quick video, hopefully something informative for maybe you guys who are getting into whip making. I know it is a very addictive hobby when you get into it and you find out that this is something you can do, and you just love it, and you start running into problems. And one of those problems can be just various characteristics of cowhide and stretchy business that can be unfortunate. So what we've got here is a big side of cowhide. We've done some cutting on it. This would have been where the animal's legs were. It's been cut off there to a straight edge, and then here we've got another straight edge at the top where the cow's back would have been up here. And this is just veg tan, 2 to 3 ounce cowhide. So what you'll find is that, like, this is going to be the better, more prime hide up here. Down here towards the animal's belly, for whatever reason, you're going to have more of a stretchy material, and it's going to be a little bit harder to deal with. So what I used to do when I first started making whips, I thought everything had to be done just an exact certain way every single time, and that's kind of a good way to start, so that if you ever change anything, you've got almost like a control, and then you have variables. So but what I did when I would make a core, I would draw everything out just exactly the way I wanted it and shape that core exactly the way I wanted it, and then cut that core right out of the hide. And what I ran into was that as I was braiding my bellies, I would notice when I'm done that the taper wasn't what I thought I was going to end up with. There would be maybe lumps, or where it would even get a little bigger here and there, and it was really frustrating. And what was happening was, whether it's when I'm putting on my conditioner or as I'm braiding and putting some pull tension on that core, it's stretching and it's changing shapes. And that's bad. You don't want that, because, that's going to affect the taper of your belly, and that's going to affect the taper of the overlay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a couple strips off of, strip off of the bottom here and a strip off of the top, and just let you see how after, I'll cut them straight and then give them a tug, and you can see what happens and how there is no more decent taper. It's gone. So I'll just take this and show you that here we've got a straight edge on this side, cut nice and straight, and then on this side as well, just so you can see that we've got a pretty straight line that we're dealing with there on this skin. And I'm just going to cut a piece just long enough to, this might be a core for a long whip. This could be a bolster, whatever you're cutting out. It really doesn't, matter. And eventually we'll use this for something. So I'll just cut a strip off here. And I'm cutting it nice and straight to a perfect taper, as dictated by the angle of this straight edge. So there's that nice straight piece. Now I'll do the same thing here, maybe this time just a touch. And we'll cut a piece apparently about 5 feet long, so this will be a nice little bolster. So here's two obviously completely different pieces of cowhide, and you can see that there's, as I run that through my hand, it just evenly tapers out to nothing. Nice and smooth. It's a great shape. But if you were to tie this onto a handle and put some conditioner on it and braid over it, that would quickly disappear. So what I'll do is I'll just give these both a stretch. Here's the one that came off of this part. This one came from up here. So yeah, I would end up with this on a handle and pulling on it pretty good. Not so hard that it'll break, hopefully, but to where I'm going to get any stretch out of that. And of course, in doing that, obviously the shape of this thing has changed drastically. And now you can probably see that as I pull that through my hand, there's a section right there where there's almost no taper whatsoever. And then right here, it swells up a little bit, where it stretched out more here than it did here. And so braiding a belly over that, well, and look at this sudden drop in size right there where my finger is. And this whole thing Now looks pretty jacked up. So now I'll take this piece off of the top and do the same to it. Just give it a good tug throughout. And this is longer and got thinner for a longer portion. So it's stretching pretty good. And now here you'll see a lot of variations. Here's a big portion where it didn't taper out too much, you know, no more, it stretched out more here. And then all of a sudden really drops in size right there. So the point is, this is one of the things you're going to have to deal with. Now you're going to be, well, how do I make a good core? What do you do? How do you make it the shape you want it? And that's where cutting by hand comes in handy, no pun intended. So what I would end up with would be something, you know, eventually this would be ready to be tied onto a handle. And then I would put my handle on a hook in one way, shape, or another. But for now, I'll just put it in this lanyard here. So again, you know, you take your core, you give it a good stretch. And now, depending on what whip you're making and what length it is, like, see, this is just a piece of scrap that we picked up and made something out of for the video real quick. And this is not something that's ready to be braided over, obviously. But all I do, when I cut cowhide, I use a very thick piece of leather. If I'm cutting my strands on kangaroo, I'll use a thinner piece of kangaroo for that. And I would say, just as a general bit of advice, anytime you go to cut cowhide like this, definitely protect your finger and use a sharp blade, because if you have a somewhat dull blade, it won't grab, and then all of a sudden it grabs and gets yanked right into the skin. So just some things to be careful. So you can see here, I've got a fairly decent straight edge on this side up until I get to this point. But you know, there's almost no taper here, and then a sudden taper there. So depending on what you want, all I'm going to do is just kind of hold that in my left hand and put my blade up here on that piece of leather. And as I twist my hand, it's going to force the blade into the hide. But I'm going to start by just kind of taking this off. Like that. And ending up with a halfway decent straight edge. So I'm going to take some of this off of this side. I normally like to just cut off of this side, but since this is so oddly shaped right here, it seems like it's harder, in my opinion, for the knife to cleanly grab on this side. Maybe I'm just not as good at it.
No, it's always problematic. You'll notice that on the cow, if you have the flesh side up, he has the flesh side down right now, it seems that when it cuts, it keeps hitting those fuzzies. Well, if you start with the fuzzy side up, which is the flesh side up, it just bites so much smoother. But you got to get used to both sides.
But, you know, basically, depending on what I want to do, now I can take this hide, fix this taper. This blade really feels like it's not the sharpest.
That happens sometimes, even fresh out of the pack. I pulled a blade out once and I cut like 2 overlays out of it, and like prep 2 overlays, no problem. And then I had another one that got dulled after 5 strands. So there's a factor there too on just the steel you're getting on these blades, how sharp it is. Also, sometimes leather being thicker or not will, dull it quicker.
I'm not liking that. This is a lot wider than I would actually, I think, usually be dealing with for a core. Another way you can do this, as this is on your, if you've got this already tied onto a belly and you're sizing it to fit, which is what I do when I cut a bolster. I don't assume that I can cut that bolster to fit off of the hide, so I cut it wider than I need it to be, get it to where it fits onto the handle, tie that much of it on, and then give it a good stretch and get all the stretchy business out of it, and then go back and start wrapping it around that belly and cutting it down where you need it until it fits, and then go from there. But one thing you can do, since it is harder to get the knife to cut in like that is you can start with your blade up here like this and just, again, this takes a little bit of practice, but you can just put a nice straight edge all the way down and maybe even get a halfway decent taper that way. But the point is you've gotten all the stretch out of this cowhide, and at this point you can make it whatever you really want it to be as far as the shape and taper. Of course, that's going to have to be based on experience and experimentation and having a general idea what you want from the get-go. But this is really the best way, in my mind, to get rid of the stretch in the cowhide, and then have a better control over how you're going to shape the core. So again, this is just a demonstration. So, but clearly a better shape to be braided over. A few spots I could definitely stand to clean up here and there, but you get the idea. So I hope this has been somewhat informative. One other thing I guess I could mention real quick, that another really good way, if you can, to stretch your cores and bolsters is to run them through a splitter. This is going to take some pulling. Hopefully your splitter blade's sharp enough to cut them cleanly, but that will also allow you to know exactly over a series of 10, 15, 20 whips what you're going to get if you know roughly how thin you split your cowhide every time, and you get the stretch out of it that way, and then you taper it by hand the way you want it to look, you know. The splitter is a really good way to do that, and it's just further going to make the core overall more consistent as far as thickness. So then you'll know what you did to get it tapered a certain way and what you ended up with after you got the belly braided over it, and just start changing things and shaking it up from there. But anyway, that's the basic process for at least stretching and shaping a core for a bullwhip. And hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll probably have some more videos on stuff like this coming out here in the near future. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.